views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to Open Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne. Coming up, a mass shooting at an elementary school has reignited conversations on gun violence in America. An associate professor of criminal justice for SUNY Oswego joins me to discuss the pattern we are seeing in mass shootings. Why are males often perpetrators in gun violence? After that, monkeypox is the latest virus slowly making its way around the globe. A professor of epidemiology for the NYU School of Global Public Health joined me to discuss the virus. What is monkeypox? Then, the Bronx Documentary Center Junior Photo League program gives Bronx youth the opportunity to become photographers. The coordinator for the BDC Junior Photo League and a participant joined me to discuss the program in their year-end exhibit. What is the importance of the Bronx Junior Photo League program? And finally, a bill targeting commercial rent tax may extend a lifeline to restaurant and bar owners in New York City. The executive director for the NYC Hospitality Alliance joined me to discuss how the bill will benefit NYC businesses. What is the commercial rent tax relief form? So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. Conversations on gun violence have resurfaced after the mass shooting at Uvalde Elementary School in Texas. Joining me to discuss the phenomenon of mass shootings and a common denominator in many cases is Jaclyn Schildkraut, an associate professor of criminal justice for SUNY Oswego. Jaclyn, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Now, a year ago, you wrote an article about mass shootings and as society returns to normal after the COVID-19 pandemic, what does the future of mass shootings look like? Can you tell me your thoughts on this now?
Yeah, it kind of was a sad reality, I think. I remember when we first entered into the pandemic that March, and everyone's like, this is the first, March that we haven't had a school shooting. And in my mind, I was going, well, no one's at school. And so when we saw in, March and April of 2021, that there was, we had events like Boulder and the FedEx shooting in Indianapolis. When I was talking with reporters around that time, they said, well, should we be expecting this? And the thing is mass shootings didn't necessarily go away during the pandemic. The opportunity for them to happen in public spaces went away. And so, it kind of shifted. And so as society came back out and we started to resume our normal activities, it was something that we saw, start to pick back up again in these more public spaces. A colleague and I actually have another article that's getting ready to come out, and we took data from the Gun Violence Archive with their mass shootings, which is a bit more broader of a definition than I normally use. But we looked at sort of how the frequency of mass shootings changed with the pandemic. And what we ended up finding is that they didn't only increase in public spaces, but also private spaces. And so even though it wasn't necessarily happening in places like schools and businesses or workplaces by current or former employees, there's other public locations where these events were happening through the pandemic.
Now, just to help our viewers understand, can you just explain how a mass shooting is defined?
That depends on who you ask, Kibin. A lot of definitions are varied. And so that leads us to really having a lack of understanding in this country about how many. The definition that you see on the screen here is the definition my colleague and I crafted to look specifically at mass public shootings and trying to really account for some situational factors. So the Gun Violence Archive does a phenomenal job of capturing any event in which 4 or more people are killed. But there's definitely going to be differences in how we respond to sort of these premeditated public mass shootings that we're very used to hearing about, like Buffalo and Uvalde. And then also things that, just happen to erupt out of a fight that leads to less opportunities per se for intervention, but other opportunities to prevent. So we really try to focus in on sort of the context, or those, situational factors that differentiate how the shootings can come to occur. And then I think another challenge to understanding the definition is that a lot of there's so much variability in how many people constitute the mass in mass shooting. A lot of people use the 4+ fatality requirement, so 4 or more people would have to die, whereas the Gun Violence Archive uses 4 or more shot, and we use an even more liberal definition. There's so many reasons why individuals who happen to find themselves in a mass shooting survive or don't survive. Things like how fast law enforcement responds, where they are shot, how fast they get medical treatment. So there's a lot of different factors that increase or affect survivability. And so we want to be really mindful of that and not just saying, well, enough people didn't die, this doesn't count as a mass shooting.
Now, can you tell us about the history of mass shootings in our country? Because sadly, this is not something new that we're seeing.
Yeah, so a lot of people really kind of think about Columbine as being the first, and it's first in its own right in certain ways. Columbine was really the first time that we ever saw mass shootings unfold live on television the way we're very used to seeing them today, and that actually just happened to be a matter of coincidence in terms of the news media on the national networks were not too far away covering a very different high-profile case when the information or the news broke about the shooting. But we've actually been able to trace mass shootings or mass public shootings all the way back into the 1800s. Of course, being able to do so is quite difficult because a lot of us rely on the media to help us identify those events. And obviously the media in the 1800s wasn't what it is today.
Now, in your article, you focus on some trends associated with mass shootings. Can you explain what you found?
Yeah, so a couple of things that are really important to note. Most mass shooters obviously are, using actually, all mass shooters are using a firearm because that's the requisite for it to be a shooting versus some other type of mass casualty event. The majority of shooters rather are males who work alone. On average, the mass shooter, looking at sort of all instances, is about 33 years old. And we do know that these types of incidents are most likely to happen in schools and workplaces. And that is because these shootings are typically perpetrated by people who are familiar with the location. So it could be a current or former student or a current or former employee. So it's largely a function of opportunity when they're selecting their sites.
Now, you mentioned that the common denominator in these mass shootings is the fact that the perpetrators are usually male. Was this something that you've noticed before, or is this kind of more of a recent finding?
No, it's actually pretty much always been like that. I remember back, and I believe it was about 2015 or 2016 when there was the shooting at the YouTube headquarters out in California. And it happened to be a female perpetrator, and everybody was incredibly confused. They're like, "Well, wait, does this happen?" And it's very, very rare that females will engage in mass shootings, especially as you can see here on their own, versus being paired with a male. But I think what we're seeing is something that largely mirrors our broader crime trends in America, which is that, when females offend in terms of homicide, they are far more likely to use things like poisoning or suffocation, asphyxiation than they are to pick up a firearm.
Now, why are we seeing this type of violence from males?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Again, I think it largely comes into the fact that males are more likely to commit these acts of violent crime and more likely to use a firearm. And so it's sort of that perfect storm or that convergence of factors that creates it. Certainly there are researchers out there who argue for toxic masculinity. There is some evidence that suggests that there is a domestic violence relationship between mass shooters or in mass shooting cases. So, I think that there's a lot of different factors at play in terms of why it's seemingly a male perpetrated phenomenon.
Now, you kind of talked about the age a little bit. I think it's very alarming that we're seeing a lot of young males. Two of them were about 18 years old. Do you think there's a certain type of conditioning in our country that's inspiring these young males to kind of commit these acts?
That's a hard question to answer, but I think an important one to ask. Certainly we know that there are a lot of males in our society who are young males who are suffering from mental health crises, who play violent video games, who express interest in firearms, and would never go on to do something of this nature. I think a challenge is in many instances you have these individuals who are craving attention in some way, and when you have a very high profile event like Columbine, like Sandy Hook, now like Uvalde, where individuals have effectively gone from nobody to celebrity in terms of how much media coverage they're getting, it certainly says to an individual who, may be like minded that, hey, if you go out and do this, you'll also get this kind of attention.
So you brought up video games, which I think is a really interesting point because a lot of people have always thought video games, violent movies, but I wonder, about social media. Do you think social media could play a part, and especially since we're seeing a lot of, male empowerment type of movements online, do you think that's why we could be seeing this phenomenon?
It's difficult to say because there's not really, excuse me, there's not really any research to suggest that. I think a challenge is that social media didn't necessarily make this new. It made it more accessible and it made it more prevalent for us to be able to recognize it. And, certainly we see that, where in, past years, it might have been that perpetrators were vocally telling people that they were going to go out and commit these acts through their leakage, like person to person. Now they may have shifted those behaviors online. We also know, of course, the internet makes it very easy for them to study one another. So I don't necessarily know that social media has made it worse. It's certainly made it more obvious.
Now, what do you think could be done to address this issue? And I'd also like to know, do you feel like this is a gender problem or is it more of an issue of gun accessibility?
I think it's a perfect storm of factors. Certainly, if we didn't have guns or had better regulations on guns, it might help to prevent some, though not all, of these mass shootings. We also know that guns are the means, but they're not everything that lead up to it. And even if replaced, it could still lead to mass casualty events. For instance, on the same day that the Sandy Hook shooting happened back in 2012, December 14th, you actually had somebody who in China, where guns are illegal, take a very large knife into a school, go to a kindergarten class, so very similar in age in terms of the victims, and knife 22 children. And, certainly, there was most of those individuals, I believe all of those individuals survived their attack because of the difference of weapon, knife to firearm. But it shows that you can remove some means, but you can't remove them all.
Now we have about 2 minutes left. In that same article, you state understanding this phenomenon in its unique context is necessary to distinguish strategies needed to prevent public mass shootings. Can you expand on this?
Yeah, I think we get too often really focused on one tree and we forget about the forest. And there's never going to be one main cause of why mass shootings happen. There's not one factor. So, for instance, here in New York, we had about a month ago the shooting in Buffalo, and everybody became very fixated on the fact that this individual was a white supremacist, where at the same time, there were white supremacists down at Disney who were waving Nazi flags at the entrance to the Magic Kingdom. Now, both of those are absolutely horrible, but they're very different outcomes. And so, if you are focused really narrowly on trying to identify the motive or a profile of these individuals, which doesn't exist, you miss the bigger picture, which is that while there may be variability between these individuals in terms of what they look like or what they're upset about or what their motivation is, they're all doing the exact same thing, and their behaviors from that grievance or that kind of motivation up to the shooting is very, very similar, which creates important opportunities for intervention.
All right, Jaclyn, thank you so much for joining me. Can you quickly just let everybody know how they can stay up to date with you and your work?
Absolutely. You are welcome to follow me on Twitter. It's at jschildkraut80. And I'm also on my website, www.jaclynschildkraut.com.
All right, once again, thank you so much for joining me. We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. Last week, we got the chance to speak with Professor Danielle C. Ompad of the NYU School of Global Public Health, who gave us more insight on the monkeypox virus and what we need to know about it. Let's take a look. Another virus outbreak may slowly be on the rise. Monkeypox is the latest virus making its way around the globe, with at least 25 cases in the US. Joining me to discuss all there is to know about monkeypox is Professor of Epidemiology at the NYU School of Global Public Health, Danielle C. Ompad. Danielle, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now, I want to jump right into it because this is like I said, it's a new virus and not a lot of people know about it. Can you just explain what monkeypox is?
Sure. So monkeypox is a viral infection similar to smallpox, but not smallpox, to be clear. And it was first discovered in an outbreak among a monkey colony that was used for research in the 50s. And then the first human case was identified in the 70s in West Africa. So it's basically an infection that causes a rash. It'll give you like little pustules on your skin. And for the most part, it's self-limiting. And for most healthy people, it lasts about 2 to 4 weeks. You'll be uncomfortable, but most people survive the infection.
Now, according to the World Health Organization, more than 250 cases have been reported in at least 16 countries. How does this virus spread?
So monkeypox is spread by person-to-person contact and by contaminated items. So what does that mean? That means that people who have infectious sores on their skin, if they are in contact with somebody else, they can transmit it that way. It also means that, let's say I have infectious sores on my skin, I put on my sweater and then I lend the sweater to somebody, that could actually potentially transmit monkeypox as well. There is some evidence that there is aerosol spread. So meaning if I'm in a room with you and we're speaking and I'm close to you, I could potentially spread it that way. But those are the main ways to transmit monkeypox.
So the CDC raises the monkeypox alert to level 2. Can you just explain what that means?
So a level 2 alert means that you should practice enhanced precautions. So it basically means that you should be careful, you should be aware of what the potential risk factors are for transmission, and that you should try not to come in contact with basically somebody who has monkeypox. So that means being in close proximity to them, as well as not sharing items with them.
Thank you. Now, there has been some confusion about the outbreak and its link to sexuality. Can you just explain what that link is?
Sure. So there have been some cases that have been among gay men. And some reporting has suggested that monkeypox is a sexually transmitted disease. But actually, it is a disease that is transmitted person to person, but it's by contact with infected sores. So it doesn't actually require sexual behavior for transmission. So I'm not sure what happened in these cases among gay men. It could have been that they were all just kind of hanging out with each other and one person had monkeypox and they transmitted it to others. It didn't necessarily mean that it was sexually transmitted.
Okay, so that kind of leads to my next question. And how can sexuality be a variable when it's not considered an STD? And are there other cases where something similar is like that?
So there are several diseases that you might see in clusters of infections among the LGBTQ population, but like everybody else, it's due to the way the disease is transmitted. So in the case of monkeypox, if one person in any group has monkeypox and they're hanging out in close proximity to their friends, they could absolutely transmit it. So I would not think of the LGBTQ population as a population that is at particular risk for monkeypox, because you can imagine, a group of teenagers hanging out together and one has monkeypox, you could have a cluster of cases there, or a group of, middle-aged women who want to go to brunch. hanging out together and one has monkeypox and you get transmission there. So we should be very careful about thinking about the LGBTQ population as a particularly vulnerable population, because monkeypox is really transmitted person to person or through infected items. It's not strictly sexually transmitted.
All right, thank you so much for clarifying that, because that was something that I was definitely really confused about. So I appreciate that. Now, I want to talk about the symptoms. What are the initial symptoms of monkeypox and how would you know to spot them?
Sure. So monkeypox symptoms are basically, it begins with fever, headache, muscle aches, backache, swollen lymph nodes, chills, and exhaustion. So it might feel like you're getting the flu. And the symptoms range from about 7 to 14 days, but can actually go from 5 to 21 days. And then within 1 to 3 days, or sometimes longer after the appearance of fever, patients will develop a rash. Often it begins on your face and then it spreads to other parts of the body. And so you'll get like pustules or papules on your skin, and then those will turn into scabs. And those, it's really important to note, those things are particularly infectious.
Now, are there any similarities to COVID in regards to symptoms?
There is some symptom overlap between COVID and monkeypox, although they are very distinct diseases caused by different viruses. But COVID has fever, you can have fatigue, you can have general malaise and body aches. But what distinguishes monkeypox is the rash.
Okay, got it. And then I really want to know, why are we now seeing so many of these types of viruses? Or has this always been something that's just been common and COVID has just really make us more alert to different types of viruses?
So monkeypox in particular has been endemic in West Africa. So that means that it's not uncommon in West Africa. And there have been cases in the past that have kind of popped up, typically among travelers or people working with animals or owning animals that are infected. So this is not a brand new disease, but it seems as though there is an increase in cases, perhaps due to animals, perhaps due to infected travelers. And I think that I'm not surprised that something like this happened. It's not something that I would necessarily panic about, but it is something that I would keep an eye on.
Can you explain how monkeypox is treated?
So monkeypox is basically, if you don't have any complications, you just got to kind of write it out. And the symptoms, you'll be uncomfortable. You need to kind of stay away from people. You need to make sure that you're washing your sheets and your clothes, and not sharing a bed with somebody who is not infected. But for the most part, you just kind of write it out. There are a few treatments that are used for people who have more severe cases, but generally most people will not be getting those types of treatments. So there are a few antiviral drugs.
And will our current method of protection against viruses help at all?
So that's an interesting question. So we have different methods for treating and preventing different viruses. So there are some viruses that are vaccine preventable, right? Like measles, mumps, rubella, yellow fever. We have vaccines that will protect us for those. For other viruses, we try to engage in behavior that will prevent us from being exposed to that. And for others, they just kind of happen. There's not a lot you can do about it, and you try to write it out. For monkeypox, we will probably be focusing on identifying cases and making sure that people that are in close contact with those cases are monitored, and making sure that those cases are very careful about hanging out with other people until their monkeypox is cleared. Again, this is not something at this point that we need to put in very stringent recommendations in place because we only have a few cases and it appears to be limited right now. That could change if we start to see more cases.
That kind of leads into my next question. I was going to say, is this something we should be worried about? And, is there a possibility this can become a pandemic?
So for a lot of viruses, there's a possibility of a pandemic. I would not be overly worried about it right now. I would be paying attention to reports of cases in the news, paying attention to what the Centers for Disease Control or the CDC says, paying attention to what the World Health Organization says, and just kind of keep an eye on it. But at this point, I would not be overly concerned and change my daily behavior.
So I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think with a lot of these viruses, and as I mentioned earlier, it seems like every couple of weeks there's something, and although it may not be new, it may be new to a lot of people. I just encourage people to kind of like keep their mental health in check, not to get super, just overly anxious about all of these new things that we're hearing about.
Absolutely. I mean, the world can be a very scary place, right? There's a lot of things happening in this world related to infectious diseases, related to gun violence, related to racism. There's a lot of scary things going on in the world right now. And for me, panicking or getting too anxious about it doesn't help, because I still have to live my life. So what I try to do is find quality information that can help me stay informed. And then when authorities who are in the know tell me that I need to change my behavior, then I think about what they're asking me to do and whether or not I can comply.
I love that answer. Thank you so much. Can you let people know how they can stay educated about monkeypox?
Absolutely. So I highly recommend the CDC website on monkeypox. It is easy to access. As my Auntie Rita would say, just Google it on your Google machine, type in monkeypox CDC. Another great website is the World Health Organization website. And again, just Google monkeypox and WHO.
All right, Danielle, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I want to give special thanks to Professor Ompad for joining us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The Bronx Documentary Center's Junior Photo League program gives Bronx youth an opportunity to become photographers. Joining me to discuss the program and their latest exhibit is program coordinator Ricardo Partita and participant Dennise Reyes. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Now, Ricardo, can you tell me about the Junior Photo League program?
Absolutely. The Bronx Junior Photo League program is an after-school program for middle school and high school students from the 6th grade to the 12th grade. We focus on teaching them documentary methods in order to showcase the human experience. We teach them photography and multimedia, and yeah.
Now, I understand that you have a year-end exhibition coming up soon. Can you tell me about that? And then can you talk about your collaboration with Photoville?
Yeah, our year-end exhibition is basically a combination of like the work that our students have been producing since October. In it, we are showcasing both middle school classes and both high school classes. The middle school classes are focusing on multimedia projects and newspaper projects, and our high school classes are focusing on documentary photography through the lens of digital photography and film photography as well. Our Photoville exhibition, or like what we have in Photoville, is just a small sample of the larger exhibition that we have here in our main gallery space at the Bronx Documentary Center at 614 Cortlandt Avenue.
Now, can you just explain what this program could mean to so many students in the Bronx?
Yeah, so like what we are trying to do within this program is that we're trying to provide an outlet for the youth in the South Bronx. A lot of the times, getting a camera is difficult. So what we do is we provide a camera and we let the camera be a tool for them to be able to express themselves through their everyday life. We want them to use this tool, and in order for them to create critical skills with it.
Now, what were some prompts that you have given some of these students to inspire them to take certain pictures?
Well, the prompts that we give them is that we want them to really view their life as sort of that is your prompt. You know, you are very interesting. We want to emphasize that anyone can do photography. Photography is not just meant for certain people, it's meant for everyone, and it should be for everyone. So, what we try to do is we try to let the students know that within photography, you are able to express yourself in many different ways.
Now, Dennise, you are a participant in this program. Can you explain what inspired you to join?
Well, I come from a family of photographers, and in fact, my uncle, he was volunteering here at the Bronx Documentary Center. So he was the one that told me about the Bronx Photo Junior League. But really, honestly, it wasn't until the death of my grandfather, I needed a way to like express myself and for it to also be healthy. So I decided to sign up.
Now, having work in an exhibit is a huge accomplishment for anybody, but how does it feel to accomplish that as a teenager?
Well, it is very rewarding to know that others are seeing and also feeling my work with me. Um, what else? I don't know. I just find it. I just love to share like my vulnerability with everyone, and I feel like photography is a tool that helps you like. How do I say? Like it just helps you just express yourself and in whatever way you want, and there's like no wrong answer to do it.
Now, what was some of the inspiration behind some of your photos?
Well, being from the Bronx and being a Mexican American and being a girl are all factors that contribute to the work I produce. It has allowed me to do a lot of the work I've done, and also just simply like my vulnerability. If it wasn't for me being honest and aware of my feelings, then I don't think I would be able to make the pictures I do.
So, in one of your photos, there seems to be like smoke in the room and people there. Can you explain that? Because I'm actually really intrigued by what I saw.
Um, yes, I was at a family party and my aunt was turning 30 years old. So if you can see like the little poster in the back, that's actually a photo of her and during her quinceañera. And I just caught like this sweet, like very like just familiar moment that I always see at family parties. So I just wanted to capture it and I caught it just right in time because the smoke was coming and I don't know, like I think I did a wonderful job capturing it because it I had to be very observant of my surroundings.
That's amazing. I really like that photo. And I also think that it
Thank
gives
you.
people an opportunity who probably wouldn't see a moment like that, to experience that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I'm curious to know, why are programs like this, Photo League so important for Bronx youth? And I'm curious to know what you think as, a Bronx youth.
I feel like the Department of Education has failed Black and Brown students in terms of like our education, mental health resources, and overall like a quality education. So I feel like the Bronx Documentary Center has been like, how do I say it? Like, it has helped that for us. I feel like they really push us to think outside the box and just think critically and like analyze our material conditions and just share our life with people. And I think right now, community is something that the Bronx youth needs and a place to feel safe. And I feel like the Bronx Documentary Center offers that to us.
Amazing. And Ricardo, I'd also like to hear from you. Why do you think programs like this are so important for Bronx youth?
I believe programs like this are so important for Bronx youth because we provide a space for them and a space for them to feel comfortable and to be able to express. And I feel like a lot of the times students seem to be restricted a lot from really showcasing what they feel. And in here, we are a place that we want you to express in any way that you can. It doesn't really matter if, even with language, we have students here that like don't even speak English too. But you know what? Photography is such an important tool because it's a universal language. With it, you can express so much, and that's what we provide here. And that's why I believe that programs like these are so important because it helps the youth think critically of, you know, of what they see in the world and how they can change it.
Now, where can people go to view these exhibits, and how long are they up?
So right now we have our exhibition up until June 18th, and they can come see it at our main location at 614 Cortlandt Avenue. We're located here in the South Bronx, and you can come during our open hours and view the work. We'll be open from Thursday through Sunday for the general public.
Now, what is the overall message viewers should take away from this exhibit, or that you hope viewers take away from the exhibit?
What I hope that viewers take away from it is the passion that the youth have towards telling stories. I really want them to know just basically that, you know, the youth have a voice and that their voice is very important and that we should be paying attention to the voice of our youth because they are the future. So I really want them to come into it and to really think of what it took these youth to create this work.
And can you tell us about the youth opportunities available at the BDC?
Yeah, so currently, right now, we're accepting applications for our summer programming. The deadline for our applications is going to be on June 15th. And you can also email me at ricardo@bronxdoc.org, and I can also send you the application. Right now, it is very competitive to get into the program, but students don't have to pay anything out of pocket, and you don't need any experience with photography in order to be a part of this program. We will provide all the supplies. The only thing that we ask is just commitment for you to come and to wanting to learn.
Now, I love that you said that you don't need any experience because I think sometimes that can be a little intimidating for people when they hear photography or any type of talent. Dennise, what would you say to other kids who are interested? Like, how would you encourage them to sign up for these programs?
Well, I just say step out of your comfort zone. I mean, everyone needs to be, I don't know, like, you're not going to know everything, and you have to put in the work for you to know and get better at it. And that is something I've learned over time. And like Ricardo said, definitely you have to be committed and dedicated for you to do photography and just like have an open mind and just be curious. Just be curious.
Exactly.
Now, I'd really like to know, I think it's amazing just to see young people kind of explore these types of opportunities. And as we mentioned, it's not something that's often given to a lot of Bronx youth. Dennise, what are your plans, in the future in regards to photography? Because I think that you have something brilliant right now.
Thank you. Well, I plan on minoring in photography at Skidmore College, which is where I'm going, and in the fall.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I do plan on coming back to the Bronx Documentary Center and hopefully becoming a teacher here in the future as well.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And then Ricardo, I guess I want to ask, like, what would you say to encourage more students and just more young people to get involved in these types of programs?
Yeah, I think like Dennise said earlier, just be curious about it. We don't, you don't have to be a photographer in order to join the program. You can have different, different hobbies. You can like different stuff. Just have a passion and curiosity for storytelling. And that's basically all you need. And then from there on, we're not trying to, push you as into, oh, you have to become a photographer. We just want to teach you just how photography can change and how documentary methods can be so important in life. So,
All
yeah.
right. Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining me. Can you just let everybody know how they can stay up to date with the Bronx Documentary Center?
Yeah, definitely. Well, you can follow us on Instagram at Bronx Documentary Center. You can also Google, you can go to our website, bronxdoc.org, bronxdocumentarycenter.org. In there, you can find all the news and all the events that we have upcoming. We are not just always an educational program. We also do exhibitions as well. So you can be up to date with all the exhibitions that we have in it. And the Bronx Documentary Center has many different components into it as well. We have a dark room, we have a lab that people can use, and we also have a library which is open to everyone in the Bronx too. And it's one of the largest photo book libraries in New York. So you can stop by, you can come check it out, you can come and read photography books. The resources are here, and we are here for the Bronx community and for everyone in general that is curious about learning documentary methods.
All
So
right.
yeah.
Thank you both so much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you so much for having us.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at bronxnet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. New legislation regarding the commercial rent tax may extend a lifeline to restaurant owners in New York City. Executive Director of the NYC Hospitality Alliance, Andrew Rigie, joined me to discuss how the temporary pause on the commercial rent tax will benefit many of these businesses. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, can you first explain what is commercial rent tax?
Yeah, so the commercial rent tax is one of these really crazy taxes that so many people don't even know about, and a lot of businesses don't know about it until they end up getting a bill from the city. It's essentially a tax on the rent that a business like a restaurant pays. Only though if they're located south of 96th Street in Manhattan and pay more than a certain amount in rent. It used to be a citywide tax. Over the years, it's been repealed everywhere. The last time a portion of it was repealed was businesses right around the World Trade Center after 9/11. But since then, thousands of businesses throughout Manhattan continue to still pay it. And it makes no sense because it's not even based on profits or anything. It's based on rent. So essentially, the city's punishing businesses like restaurants for paying a lot of money in rent, which is already punishment enough just because they want to be in the city.
Now, your team described it as a discriminatory practice. Can you explain how it's discriminatory?
Absolutely. It only impacts businesses south of 96th Street in Manhattan. So if you're on 95th Street, you could potentially be paying the commercial rent tax. But if you're on 99th Street, you're not. If you're in Queens or if you're in the Bronx, for example, you're no longer paying it. And it's really problematic because we need fair, equitable implementation of laws, regulations, and taxes in the city. And especially as we try to recover from the pandemic, we shouldn't be punishing these businesses being located in places where the commercial rents tend to be the most expensive and in specific neighborhoods where they rely heavily on office workers that haven't yet returned to the office and maybe never will because of hybrid work, and who rely heavily on tourists. And we know that the city of New York is not yet back to the nearly 70 million annual visitors that used to come to our city every year, eat at our restaurants, drink at our bars, stay at our hotels. So it's really discriminatory because it only impacts some people, not others. And the tax really is a relic and should be eliminated completely. And that's why we're really happy about this legislation.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that legislation?
Yeah, so essentially, what the commercial rent tax legislation would do is it would eliminate the commercial rent tax, which is about a 3.9% tax on top of a business's annual rent. So it would suspend the tax for the next 3 years, particularly focused on these businesses that have yet to recover from the pandemic and are still struggling.
Now, how would this positively affect smaller businesses?
Well, one of the things that's been so challenging is people know, doesn't matter where in the city you're located, commercial rents for small businesses have gone up and up and up. And there's so many businesses located in Manhattan where the rents for commercial space tend to be the highest, particularly if you're by Times Square or other areas near Fifth Avenue or Midtown. And what's been happening over the years is we've seen rents have gone up, 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 up. And now many of these businesses, there's probably between 400 and 500 businesses in Manhattan that are restaurants and bars that are paying the commercial rent tax. So this proposed legislation would suspend payment for 3 years and hopefully eliminate it entirely on all of these businesses in the future.
Now, are smaller businesses expected to pay the same amount of money as, let's say, a Forever 21 on Times Square? Like, how do they determine what amount of money a business should pay, especially if they're in that expensive area?
Yeah, so that's the challenge about this. And one of the problems is it's not based on like how much profit a business is making. It's based on their annual rent. So if your annual rent crosses a threshold, you pay a 3.9% tax on top of that annual rent. So if you were paying, $1 million in rent, which a restaurant, it sounds like a ton of money, but there's a lot of restaurants that you wouldn't think pay that much, but are paying $1 million a year in rent. They would pay 3.9% on top of their rent. So it just adds up really, really quickly. And one of the big things that we've been saying that makes it extra problematic and why it's relevant to people, no matter where in the city you live, not just if you're in Manhattan south of 96th Street, is these restaurants in Manhattan that are impacted by this tax, people that work at these restaurants work throughout the five boroughs. So we need to alleviate these burdens on these businesses in Manhattan paying the commercial rent tax because we want them to not only survive, but to thrive and flourish and to employ people who live throughout the 5 boroughs. We also need these businesses to survive because in addition to paying the commercial rent tax, they're paying all sorts of other taxes that help support our city's essential services, whether it's sanitation, whether it's public safety, whether it's the schools. All these other taxes that they pay go to really supporting our city's essential services. And we also know that Midtown and Lower Manhattan, where a lot of these restaurants are paying the tax, are huge drivers towards tourism and visitors coming into New York City, which are so important not only to those neighborhoods, but the overall economic and social health of the city throughout the 5 boroughs.
Now, how were businesses affected by commercial rent tax prior to the pandemic?
Well, they ended up having to pay a lot of money in this commercial rent tax that gets, passed on to them because they're paying high rent. So it posed significant financial burdens on top of high rent, on top of high taxes, on top of all the other sky high costs that it takes if you want to run a restaurant or another type of business in the city of New York. So it's just one of those expensive, unnecessary financial burdens that's not really based on, like I said before, profits or anything. It's based on high rent, and businesses already pay high rent, and that's kind of punishment enough for being in the city. But we try to figure out a way to pay it for the city just to force these businesses to pay the rent, especially when it's been repealed everywhere else in this city, is just unfair and, like I said, discriminatory.
Now, I can imagine how that's a lot of pressure and just a lot to think about for these restaurant owners. Can you explain the hit the restaurant industry took following the pandemic?
Yeah, so we've lost, probably a couple thousand restaurants that shuttered due to the pandemic. We lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. Thankfully, some of them are coming back, but we're still about 50,000 jobs short in our city's restaurants and bars compared to the industry's pre-pandemic employment level. So many of these small businesses racked up huge amounts of debt. Some are fortunate. They got the Restaurant Revitalization Fund grant through the federal government, which is a real small business saver. Unfortunately, however, about 65% of restaurants in New York that applied and were eligible and qualified were shut out because the money was quickly exhausted and the federal government shamefully failed to replenish the grant fund to ensure that small businesses got the support they needed. So now a lot of them are having to pay past due rent. We all have heard and feel in our pockets what's going on with inflation. Well, skyrocketing costs for restaurants, both for all the products and goods that they purchase and serve. And then, of course, labor costs are a huge challenge because they've continued to go up. Of course, we want to take good care of our people, pay them properly. But, it's really tough for a business and an industry that's struggling and traditionally operates on small profit margins if there's even any money to be made, especially coming out of a pandemic.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because I was thinking that, we've been reopened for some time now and that maybe these restaurants and bars have been able to recover. I want to know your thoughts on that. And you brought up inflation, which I thought was really interesting, that when something goes away, there's like a new problem that arises for a lot of these business owners. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so restaurants that were fortunate enough to get this restaurant revitalization grant are in a much better place, but it's a lot of uncertainty still. We're cautiously optimistic. People want to be out eating, drinking, socializing at their favorite restaurants and bars, but we saw what happened in the past. We thought we were, in the clear, and then the Delta variant came and boom, just devastated the restaurant industry again. We thought we were starting to recover, and then the Omicron variant came and boom, devastated the industry again. So we're all hoping that we're in a much better place and we won't have those types of huge, blows, but you never know what lies ahead. And these are small businesses for the most part, and they operate on weekly sales, they're monthly sales. So coming back of 2 years of mandatory government shutdown, lots of changing regulations and rules makes it so difficult. So I think for the everyday New Yorker, when they walk past their favorite restaurant, and hopefully these days they're seeing them pretty busy, they should just understand and recognize that just because the restaurant's busy today doesn't mean that they've wiped out that pandemic debt and everything's okay. for the most part, there's still going to be a long road to recovery. So we need to support our local restaurants, those workers, and really support them, because for New York City to recover, we need our restaurants, our nightlife, our culture to recover. They're such an essential part of the fabric of New York City and what makes, New York so great.
Now, what will it take to get this bill enacted to protect these restaurants?
Really what we need is support from city council members throughout the 5 boroughs and Mayor Adams. There are some key city council members that support it. It was introduced by Council Member Keith Powers, who is the majority leader in the council, support from the Manhattan Borough President. And what's interesting, as I said before, even though it just applies to businesses in Manhattan, it really is an issue that impacts the Bronx and all 5 boroughs, because people who own restaurants in Manhattan that are subject to this tax, they may live in another borough. Many of the people that work at these businesses that we want to keep open because we want to keep them employed, they live in other boroughs like the Bronx. So it really is a citywide issue. And the last time, a bunch of years ago, the commercial rent tax was reformed to exempt some more businesses. It got done with the support of city council members citywide, because they recognize, as I just explained, that although it impacts parts of Manhattan, we are 5 boroughs, but we're one city.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. Can you let people know how they can stay in contact with your organization?
Absolutely. Our website is thenycalliance.org. We're also on places like Twitter at the NYC Alliance. I'm at Andrew Rigie. And you can just Google us and you'll find us, or even speak with your local restaurant owners, and hopefully you can connect. But go out, eat, drink, enjoy, and support.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin, Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.